Hello again, everyone, and welcome to SCLC TV. I'm your host, Maynard Eaton, and of course, joining me is our president and CEO, Dr. Charles Steele Jr. Dr. Steele, you've been in the civil rights movement all your adult life. These last 10 days have been unprecedented in terms of civil rights protests, mayhem. Has the civil rights movement moved up a notch? What is happening with the civil rights movement from where you sit?
Well, first of all, thank you for that question, man. We, as a people, and I'm talking about black and white, fair-minded thinking folks all over, not just America, but the world. But the world is dependent upon the civil rights of America, because what people don't realize, we freed the world with SCLC and other organizations in terms of the 1965 Voter Rights Act. People don't know how important that was and is, even though we have Section 4 and Section 5 gutted. What happened, and I like what the former coach of the University of Alabama and also Georgia Tech alumnus, former coach Bill Curry, said that we missed an opportunity in the 60s in order to eradicate racism. We thought integration was going to take care of all of that. Well, I mean, you know, we're prognosticators to some degree, but we can't look into the future that far. We were concerned basically about having the same rights of those of the Caucasian race primarily. And we felt that integration was going to resolve all of those problems. But it got to the point that we discovered that, even for an example, you check into a motel or a hotel, but you have problems checking out because you don't have enough money to pay for the bill. Economics. During that time of successes.
Dr. Steele, there's some who suggest, young people suggest or charge, that perhaps the civil rights movement failed. Now, you're a civil rights leader. How do you answer that?
How could anyone say that the civil rights movement failed? I mean, that's ludicrous, asinine to think that the civil rights movement failed, because what you are doing now to any degree came out of the civil rights movement. Now, I agree. We gone back 50 years. We gotten to a point where we had the upward mobility. Right about the early 70s, that's when we began to start losing ground. Well, right after Dr. King was assassinated. And the reason being is that we rested on our laurels. What many people didn't realize, and we can go back and look at now, is that when you are successful and accomplish certain things, you cannot think that you don't have to continue to fight just like you didn't accomplish those successes that you have. So that's where we missed the boat, along with the fact of economic development, along with the fact of understanding that we need to concentrate on black wealth. That's what the whole problem is about. That's why the transatlantic African slave trade came about, because of white wealth. They brought Africans and ultimately African Americans, who we are today, they brought us from Africa for cheap labor, for not paying any wages. And ultimately, after we made some progresses, we got cheap labor. We never got the fair wages that people of the Caucasian race got. But we built this country upon the greed and the supremacy of white leadership within this country. This country was founded upon racism, and we built this country, and we've never been paid for it. Reparation is of the essence of what need to be settled in the content of bringing back Section 4 and Section 5 of the 1965 Voter Rights Act, which eradicated us having protection from the federal government. You're going back to state rights because there's no protection from the federal government. It's all state rights now. And that's where we lost the battle. Even in the modern day of our successes. We have lost, and we've gone back 50 years. But the problem is, we are not talking about the root causes. The root causes have to be COVID aura, not COVID-19, which is a problem. But COVID-19 has a sister, and it's called COVID aura, COVID racism. And that's where we are today. And then there's a cousin called COVID 400, where we 401 now, where we've been under oppression for over 400 years.
Dr. Steele, I've never seen it. I'm 70. I've never seen protests in all 50 states for the past 10 days. Yesterday, you were participating in a University of Alabama protest in Tuscaloosa. Tell me about that. You were in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, leading speaker there amongst seemingly 1,500 students or more, right?
Absolutely. We just got back from Tuscaloosa, my hometown. We had a very successful march in Tuscaloosa, and I'm kind of disgruntled. It's a bittersweet spirit because 1,500 people marched and asked me to come lead them because they want some training in the civil rights movement. That's where we see a lot of the shortfalls of the marches of today, is that people have not been structurally trained on how to conduct a march. You don't just march without training. It's a science to marching. But the majority of the young people who invited me to lead them was Caucasian, of the white race. But we were so successful in that march that we had a diverse audience in terms of over 1,500 people, including the mayors, the representatives. It was overflowing. And the epicenter of training and working together, and we worked with the local chapter of SCLC and the NAACP, the Youth Coalition March. We all agreed that we're going to start an epicenter of training right there with these young folks in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. They all want to be trained. And in the meantime, Seattle, Washington called. They said, we want to be a part of SCLC training with the youth movement. So the youth movement understand the importance and significance of training and being very respectful to the human race, regardless of their ethnicity or background, and also respecting property. We're talking about a nonviolent movement, and that's what we were about from the start in 1957 with Dr. King being a co-founder. And that's where we are today, and that's what we're going to maintain, nonviolent protests.
And you're saying to do that, nonviolence doesn't just happen. It has to be taught, has to be strategized, has to be trained. And as Dr. King and others, C.T. Vivian and others did when they were in their 20s, right? They were young people when they did this,
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. You're talking about institutionalizing the nonviolent approach of the Kenyan philosophy. Institutionalizing to the point where you're talking about from K through 12 and even to higher education in the churches, at home, in the family, throughout society. That should be a mechanism to be institutionalized to teach the training of peaceful marches and protests. That's what Dr. King was about. That's why I traveled the world. He said, now's the time to institutionalize and internationalize the civil rights movement. People all over the world are talking about, give us this training that you all co-founded with Dr. King.
And you're taking it to Seattle, Washington, you say. That's the next step.
The next stop will be in Seattle, Washington. I just got a call in Southeast Georgia again. They want us to come down and lead them on a march on next Saturday, and we're committed to that. But on the 19th, we'll be here with Southeast Georgia under the leadership coming from Southeast Georgia, our chapter there from Southeast Georgia, bringing a cadre, caravan of people, and they bringing them to the state capitol here in Georgia. And we'll have the various civil rights organizations working with SCLC. But this is an overlay, an extension of what we did there in Waycross, Georgia, and throughout the other 6 counties that we touched upon that was very successful this past Saturday in regards to Ahmaud Arbery, who was slaughtered, who was murdered, even with the young man that took the video it has been exposed as recent as a few months ago that he was a part of the strategy to kill Mr. Arbery. Ahmaud Arbery was a conspiracy upon the folks in the police department there, and it all came out today. And they were deputized unofficially. And from one account that just came out was that one of the guns or the guns that killed Ahmaud was also legally attached to the sheriff's office. Now that's something that can't be allowed, can't be tolerated, and is really serious in terms of this investigation. And I'm just interested in where it's going to ultimately lead to.
You met with Ahmaud Arbery's sister and his mother, right? What
That's
came out
right.
of that
They were together with us for a whole day a week ago.
What was that like? That had to be touching. It had to be tough on you.
And his mother, Miss Cooper, is a very strong lady, very independent in her thinking, very committed, and committedly we are going to support her.
What's going on in this country now, Dr. Steele?
Racism is a subject matter that we all dodge. We all swept it under the rug. Right. It is a topic that we just said it would go away, like osmosis or the waving of a magic wand. That's not going to happen. We miss many opportunities to discuss racism. When you have 60% of Black wealth that's been evaporated, eradicated, gone, where Black folks don't have any jobs. And I keep saying it like a broken record. 75% of the citizenry, regardless of the ethnicity and background, 75%, Mr. Eden, goes to work every day before the 40 million was laid off and furloughed. In other words, don't have any money or checks coming in. Even before then, 75% of the American populace that went to work was living from check to check. And guess what? 72% of those living from check to check cannot take out a $500 loan from the bank or can't expand their checking account for a $500 emergency. Something is wrong with that.
Also continuing is a COVID-19 problem, disease, pandemic. 49% of the victims in Georgia are Black. Everything seems to be hitting the Black community at once, all of a sudden.
Well, it's no surprise. It shouldn't be. See, many times we give speeches and we talk to people and try to convey the message because we do have the facts. It all relates back to racism. We don't understand that until we eradicate racism from the individuals. When I say individuals, on all sides of America and then ultimately throughout the world. We never talk about this on Sunday mornings. You know, scripturally, I'm as motivated and encouraged as anyone. But I'm also like Peter. As I hear the scripture, I'm ready to fight. You know, I'm ready to take a stand. And most people, regardless of the ethnicity or background, they are bypassers. They let all of the opportunities that will bring us together in a harmonious working relationships bypass us, like going to a major metropolitan area, there's a bypass because folks don't want to be in the congestion of the traffic. And I'm saying on this road, there is no bypass. You have to go directly through the traffic and to the congestion of dealing with the problems of today. And most people have not committed themselves to this.
Finally, Dr. Steele, before we conclude, what's the answer? Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here? Yeah, where do we go from here? As a prognosticator, I'm looking into the future, and I do feel I have a gift in that, is that we have to go back to ground zero, which is training. Dr. King believed in training the people on the concerns and the issues before we march, before we take action. Direct action is the impact of protest. But because of the lack of training in terms of all of the aspect of people who really concerned about the emotions that they have, and let's curtail it and let's move right now, that's good. But you also have to curtail your emotions and have a strategy, have a plan. But you also need to work under the experience of people who have been successful in leading us to the promised land of today. And what's that promised land? That promised land is creating jobs, bringing in opportunities for those who've been left out of the process, having credibility and integrity. The first thing people must realize, in order to lead, you must be trustworthy, not giving a great speech, which is important. You have to have the articulation and the charisma to bring about a leadership in any individual. And folks have to trust you. Some of the greatest of speeches were just speeches because no substance was there in terms of the seriousness of what we need to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Dr. Charles Steele Jr., the president, the CEO, and a civil rights leader. I'm Maynard Eaton. See you next week.